Hi everybody, I want to make a short video to go over the Culturally and Linguistically Sustaining Lesson Plan 1. So for this lesson plan, you're going to find it under assignments, and you'll see an assignment page that looks kind of like this. Obviously, I'm looking at the teacher view here, but if you click on it, you'll be able to access the instructions as well as a template. Once you click on a box or a link that says open, you'll be able to access the template. And of course, you have to make sure to go over the learning segment guidelines and rubrics. So why don't we start with that first? So, this this guideline over here is really for the final learning segment, right? Because it talks about developing a sequence of 3 lessons, but you will first develop one lesson, and after you develop that lesson, you will obviously turn it in, and then you will receive feedback from me, and you'll revise it according to my feedback and plan 2 more that go along with that lesson. So these lessons have to go one after the other, and they have to be related to one theme or topic. You can choose the content area, of course, that you would like to focus on, as well as the grade level. But again, it has to be a topic that allows for 3 sequential lessons. Also, it has to be a topic that is culturally and linguistically sustaining. And after this week, you are learning more about what that is. So what does that mean? So you're teaching in a way that is culturally relevant, but beyond that, culturally sustaining. So you saw some examples from the Pear Deck lesson about what CSP is. And you also saw examples of what this might look like for different content areas. So I hope that you go back, revise those, and think about how you can plan a lesson that honors students' languages and cultures. Okay, so let's go through these guidelines right here. So you're identifying a central focus. You're identifying language objectives, which I will talk to you in a little bit as well. And you're also thinking about, well, how can I also include UDL principles, right? Universal Design for Learning. So this lesson we did last week, this is about giving students choices, right? Or giving students multiple ways of really understanding or having access to the content, as well as, like it says right here, multiple ways of representation, action, and expression. And I think that I've been modeling that a little bit through this online class. For instance, for your autobiographical literacy and language journeys, you all had a choice as to how you might want to go about representing or describing your journey. So that is sort of a way that I was able to apply UDL for your own assignment. As you're thinking about which lesson to plan, look at these questions and reflect on these lessons. What are your students, and this is sort of a hypothetical group of students, what do they know? What can they do? What are they learning to do, right? Hypothetically, again. What do you want your students to learn? What is really the major learning goal for you? And what are the important language development goals and core content area concepts that you want students to develop? And also think about what instructional approaches, maybe a project-based learning, which, 3 lessons doesn't really allow for a real full development. So I'm not really sure that might work for this assignment, but you can definitely think about UDL approaches to learning, of course. And then thinking about what are some of the learning experiences or activities or translanguaging spaces and assessments that you can design to provide a meaningful learning experience for your students. And again, translanguaging space is about incorporating the home language within your teaching. So, and especially for the upper grades, for middle school and high school students, they have more agency than maybe the little ones. They can do research in the home language. They can probably write in their home language. So if a student is probably not that advanced in English, it's going to be very helpful to open those translanguaging spaces for them. So what does that mean? That might look like, having the students can have the options of writing in their home language and then working towards writing that piece in English. Or maybe that looks like being able to sit next to a home language partner so that they can discuss and that they can help each other and support each other through the learning and, through the use of their home language as well. So translanguaging spaces, how can you bring in the home language? All right. So we're going to, and you can take a look at this rubric when you get a chance, but please do take a moment to really go over it. And obviously you're going to want to start maybe in the exemplary sort of column and go down so that you can see kind of what you are expected to do in order to get the best grade possible. All right. So let's go back to the assignment here. And I'm going to open the lesson plan template. Again, for you, you'll have an open button right around here. You open it and that's how you'll get your own copy of the lesson plan template. So I'm going to open it. And it takes me to sort of a cover page area and then the lesson plan, right? So in the cover page, this is sort of for the 3 lessons, for the 3 combined lessons. You can start filling it out, but you don't have to develop it too fully yet. This will be the first cover page here that you're seeing. This will be really required for the learning segment, for the final 3 lessons. So you can start maybe filling some of these things out, but you might not be, you're probably not finalizing it until after you're planning the 3 lessons together. So we're going to skip over to the lesson, the actual lesson. So the topic, what is it that you want to teach? What is it that you really want students to learn, right? I'm going to be actually posting a couple of examples that you can look through to get a better sense of what this actually looks like completed. But you choose your topic. Again, it should lend itself to be culturally sustaining. For instance, for PE, you might want to think about, well, what is it that I'm teaching that students can use to take sort of back to their community and improve sort of community fitness levels, nutrition, right? How can you make them think critically about what they're putting into their bodies so that what they're learning can be community sustaining, right? For mathematics, maybe you want to teach statistics, and maybe you can look at statistics from a very critical lens, right? How can you teach statistics in a way that matters? So maybe I'm thinking about a crisis here. Maybe I'm thinking about mass incarceration and thinking about what that looks like and how you can use statistics to explain or to really analyze that phenomenon, right? So, you're learning about statistics, but you're also learning about something that matters. And in a way, you're sort of pushing for students to really think critically about these issues that are affecting our society and have been affecting our society. Materials, so this is about what is it that you need to teach this lesson effectively? So maybe tablets, maybe laptops, maybe a projector, maybe a smart board. So all of these things would go here. Common Core standards. For one lesson, you only need a minimum of 1 standard. And please don't just say, writing, 6.7. That doesn't really mean anything to me. I don't want to have to do, to have to look up each one. Write it out. And you at least need 1. So write it out, please. Write it out. So objectives. We have 3 objectives here. So the first one is the learning outcome. What is it that you want students to be able to do at the end of this 50 minutes lesson, right? And usually you start with students will be able to, and then you continue. So maybe students will be able to analyze their intake of nutrition and think critically about how this affects their bodies, right? So that could be the first goal lesson, right? For the language objective, I'm going to post a sort of separate resource for this. What are the language structures that students need to be able to be successful for the assignment that I have planned for this lesson, right? So maybe students need to compare and contrast. Maybe they need to think about cause and effect. So I'm going to give you an example of compare and contrast. So maybe for compare and contrast, students will need sentence structures like unlike, dot, 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 this is dot, 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 right? Or compared to, right? So these are examples of a language objective. You're sort of equipping students with those language structures that are needed to be successful in whatever assignment that you decide goes for lesson 1. And for the translanguaging objective, how can you encourage the use of the students' home languages so that students have access to the content and the learning that takes place and can feel that they can contribute? Recall the video of Moises and how frustrated he was and how frustrated perhaps you were that the teacher was doing nothing to tap into the home language resources that he had, right? So this is what you're doing here. You're thinking about the hypothetical home language resources that your students have and how you can tap into those so that they can learn the best in the best way that they can. So perhaps students can conduct research on nutrition in any language, right? They can maybe complete a web or like a sort of web or graphic organizer. Organizer in any language, but must present in English, So that's sort of a way that you can include translanguaging in your teaching. Or maybe they can be partnered with like home language peers, right? So that they can support each other's learning. And I'm going to correct this real quick. So those are some examples, but in the readings, especially for this week, you'll see how different teachers, and you read chapters 1 and chapter 2 from the translanguaging guide, you saw examples of how teachers in different settings, right, did translanguaging. But this is just a few examples, and you can, 1 or 2 bullet points is perfect. Now we're getting closer to the lesson, the launch, hook. And these are instructions that can guide you. How can you get these lessons started? Think about a really interesting way to get students to become engaged with this. And think about how you can use translanguaging strategies. How can you bring in the home language to really hook students, right? So maybe you're thinking about posing a provocative question. Maybe you're thinking about showing a few minutes of a documentary on nutrition and fitness, right? Something like kind of shocking that will get students sort of hooked, right? And thinking about how to move forward with that. And then you get to the sort of lesson anatomy part. So how are you modeling what you want students to be able to do? And you have a few sort of guidelines over here. How are you modeling what you want students to be able to accomplish? How are you teaching it? How are you using translanguaging and UDL approaches so that everybody has access to it, right? Now, the second part we do, how are you sort of guiding this practice so that you're so you first do it and then you ask students to sort of do it together with you, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And then finally, either independent or group practice in table groups, what are they going to do independently? Or they may be going to research and prepare the presentation, on nutrition and how it affects their bodies, etc. And then think about adding a few bullet points. And this is a little bit repetitive, you'll think, right? But just think about other ways that you can also create translanguaging spaces, but you can also sort of look back here and add some bullet points here from the very top. And here, because I want to make sure that you're all thinking about ways to make it completely accessible to any type of learner, how are you using your UDL approaches? How are you providing multiple means of action and expression? And we saw that lesson last week. And here, briefly explain how this lesson aligns to culturally and linguistic sustaining pedagogy, right? So you're learning all about this this week. which is why, I'm posting this video today, because at least you've had a couple of days to explore those. But briefly explain how your lesson aligns to a CSP or CLSP approach. The final part, how are you going to bring the lesson to a close? And how are you going to assess? How are you going to know whether or not your students met the objective that you posed at the very beginning? How are you going to know that they met their learning outcome or the learning goal? All right. So perhaps it's an exit slip. Perhaps it's, sort of a short presentation on how nutrition sort of affects their bodies, right? I mean, that's culturally sustaining. That's really sort of a sustaining sort of way of thinking about nutrition, because it's sort of applicable to the self, right? And of course, when it's applicable to the self, it can also be applicable to the community. And I think that would be a good transition to the next lesson, right? So thinking about how are they going to take that learning and sort of spread it out to the community, right? To really make it culturally and linguistically sustaining, and thinking about ways that they can themselves make sure that they are thinking about ways to make this information accessible to all members of the community. So, that will require students to think about how they can deliver it in different languages, perhaps. I mean, that's just an idea. This is just an example that I'm sort of using here. But again, I will post a few examples from a couple of the content areas, so you see a variety of ways that students have approached this. Does it mean it's a perfect lesson? I mean, I don't think that there is such a thing as a perfect lesson, and this is sort of you can think about it as a draft, although it will be graded, but it'll be a chance for you to learn, right? So you'll be receiving feedback fairly quickly from me, because we do have, we do have our class coming to a close very, very soon, before we know it. So you'll get your feedback pretty quickly, and then you'll improve on this first lesson, and then plan 2 more. What naturally comes next for lesson 2, and then what comes next for this topic for lesson 3. Remember, it's the same topic. It's related to the same topic, right? But yeah, so thinking about, what is lesson subtopic 1, you start there, and then think about what can you do for 2 and 3 that naturally sort of follow each other. All right, so that is all for now. Again, I will post some examples from various content areas so that you can get a better idea of what this looks like. None of these are going to be perfect, but at least you'll get an idea of what is expected of you. Have fun with it. And I think the most important thing is teach about something that matters in a way that matters. So, and I'm going to repeat that again. Teach something that matters in a way that matters, and you'll be all right. Thank you.